I am calling this meeting to order at 7:30 p.m. We'll start with roll call.
With 21 members present, a simple majority is 12 and 2/3 majority is 14.
We'll move from 3.1 to 3.2, report from the executive branch, Vice President Fawn.
Good evening, everyone. I hope your week is going well so far. Congratulations to all the senators that got reelected for the 68th session, and congratulations to our Supervisor Treasurer, John Wong, for being elected as Supervisor President. So I have a few things to report for today. So today, President Howard, Director Nguyen, Sarah Murphy, Sarah Ping, Judicial Clerk Means and I tabled for our final election tabling event where we gave out free boba and encouraged students to vote. We gave out all of our boba, so we ran out around 12:30, and we got a lot of students to vote in our elections, which is amazing. For our elections, if you didn't hear, the Elections Commission announced the results. We had over 2,300 voters, which is better than the past. It was better than 9 out of 10 of our previous elections, so that's awesome to see. Additionally, Speaker Owens, Chairperson Owens, Sir Izzard, Advisor Fonseca, President Howard and I met with Psychology Clinic today virtually to discuss the ADHD, Autism, and Learning Disability Testing Fund and the pending legislation that we have for tonight. We'll have more to talk about it when we go up to present it for the second read. We will make some changes tonight for some parts of the bill. Last Thursday, President Howard and I met with the Senior Vice President of Finance, Administration, and Operations, David Miller, for our monthly meeting. We discussed tuition, athletics, and the state legislators' funding decisions. The university has sent information to staff and faculty through the WTU Today newsletter with that information, and I expect a really similar message to be sent to students soon. If you notice, the Sunflower did report on that tuition increase and additional information related to that. Additionally, last Thursday, Speaker Owens, Treasurer Wong, President Howard, and I went to Thursday's RSC Board of Directors meeting where we discussed student fees and the progress on the RSC roof. If you looked outside or you've been walking throughout the building, you can hear them working on the roof, so it should be done very soon. Additionally, we also had our SGA presidential and vice presidential forums on that very same day. Tomorrow, our student government will have a town hall meeting, which will be completely virtual from 3:15 to 4:30, and it will be with President Muma, Vice President Hall, and Provost Lounsbury. We will ask a variety of different questions, some of them related to athletics, tuition, and the university's different initiatives and goals that they have for upcoming years. But for anyone that wants to submit questions for President Howard and I to ask the administrators joining the town hall, please send them to President Howard at sga.president@wichita.edu. Next week, President Howard and I will go to Pittsburgh State for our monthly K-Board visit, where we will start wrapping up some of our different initiatives and discussions that we've been having with student governments across Kansas. For our Chief of Staff, Westbrook, he is still finalizing all the meeting minutes for student fees. He is almost done, and wrapping up the final Finance Commission meeting minutes as well. For our Director of International Student Affairs, Wenjay, we finalized the proposal documents for the International Student Mentorship Program, and it's ready for the official review and implementation for the next session. We had a meeting earlier today to discuss that process. For our Director of Engagement and Leadership, Fritz, the Freshman Leadership Council tabled on Tuesday and will table again tomorrow for their final spring event. Their final spring event will be on April 18th from 11 to 2 p.m. at the Shocker Hall courtyard. There will be free boba at that event, yard games, and many more things. So I will encourage you all to support our Freshman Leadership Council at their final event for the year. For our Director of Student Organizations, Chohan, today, Director Chohan and I visited the Shocker Choir Student Organization today and talked about our elections and what resources we have for students for SGA. And additionally, today I talked to the president of IISE to talk about what feedbacks that we had for different student organizations here on campus and what we can do better as a Student Government Association. Additionally, we visited the Artist Exploration Association, Delmia I Robotics, BMES, 3D Printed Prosthetics, and GSA BME last week, and earlier this week to talk about SGA and our elections. President Hauer, Director Chauhan, Sarah Murphy, Chief of Staff Westbrook, and I attended those various RSO visits, so we were very happy to get to know a lot more students and promote our elections as well. We have several more RSO visits scheduled for this week, and the Excel sheet will be updated tomorrow morning with our updated visits for the rest of this week. So if senators are interested in going to those RSO visits, just put your name on the spreadsheet and I will send you the calendar invite with the meeting information and kind of what we're talking about at those meetings. Last Monday, Director Chauhan, President Howard, and I also participated in judging for the Chakra Leadership Awards for the new, small, and large organizations of the year. We saw so many amazing organizations, and we're really excited to see what the final results are for those. For our Director of Outreach, Wynn, she wanted to express her gratitude to all the senators who helped table for these past few weeks. We have one more event left for this semester, and we would highly encourage senators to be there for our food truck send-off event. So I will be sure to post flyers for that event later tonight. And that event will have several food trucks for free food for students that come. So it's always a really fun event to show our appreciation for students as we wrap up the session. For our Director of Media Relations, Sadov, on Friday, we did our SGA leadership and cabinet photo shoot to provide more graphics for SGA, but also to cap off this session. And we also recorded several videos where we express our thanks to the students. So you should be seeing that on our Instagram and on Newsblast very soon. We're very excited to have those be out. For our undergraduate advocate, Wassinger, she currently has 6 active cases, 5 academic and 1 discrimination, which is slightly different than last week. We will have a task force meeting tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. for anyone that wants to attend. If you want to attend that meeting, please reach out to her. Those are pretty much the reports I have for this week. I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move next to the report of the speaker. Okay, hello everybody, welcome back again. We are so close to the end of the session, so I just really want you to take these last couple of meetings that we have legislation to really end out the session right. And beyond that, last Thursday, as Vice President Fawn stated, we went to our very last RC Board of Directors meeting this session. We kind of talked about how the RSC will sustain itself with the budget cuts from fiscal year 26 recommendations from the Finance Commission and student fees processes, and so how they will absorb those costs. And then we talked about the roof as well as plans to change the CAC theater to make it accessible as well, and all of those kinds of things. And it was stated that maybe potentially that can be a partnership with SGA in the future. So it's an exciting opportunity to make our campus a little bit more accessible. And then, as Vice President Fawn stated, and I'm sure all of you are aware, our voting started this Monday and ended today at 5. The certification of those results was at 6 p.m. And then tomorrow, President Hauer and myself will go and certify those election results at the presentation of certification of the election board at 1 p.m. on the 11th. And that'll be a great opportunity on Friday to sign that and get everything confirmed. So congratulations to all of our senators who are coming back and all of our new senators who will enter this room. Fantastic that you've decided to join us and decided to serve your students. So really excited about that. And we'll move also. This morning we met bright and early for our meeting with the psychology department to talk about the contracts with the psychology department in addendum after we passed a lot of our legislation about the ADHD and learning, autism and learning disability testing support fund, and then passed subsequently the funding for that fund as well. And we talked about privacy concerns associated with processing through the hardship fund, different approaches to this scholarship, and potential plans in the future as well. And we'll have our authors talk about that today later. And you can ask any questions too. And then I had a meeting with the Sunflower today to talk about SGA, our legislative branch, and the role of the speaker in their podcast. It was a lovely meeting that I got to brag about all of the work that you all do and speak about SGA and the importance of SGA and so many other things. So. Beyond that, the submission has closed for legislation as it was April 4th. So going forward, we will only have the legislation that has been processed through committee or any legislation that is one read appointments from our executive branch. And then we also have the Accessibility and Disability Pride meeting, task force meeting at 3:30 tomorrow. If you're able to join, there's a Zoom option as we will be conducting it Zoom, and we'll also do it in the SGA conference area room. So I'd love for you to come. I'll be there, and it'd be a great opportunity to support our students here on campus. As I stated before, I will be leaving the 12th. Bright and early for a Model UN conference. I'll be going to New York along with a couple of our other members of leadership in the Senate. And so I will not be available in person, but you can shoot me an email, give me a couple of days to respond because I'll be doing some pretty busy work. But we fly back the 18th, and so I'll be available that coming Monday. So we won't have legislative affairs, and we will have Vice President Fawn fill in April 16th for that role. Additionally with that, we won't be having committee of the whole this next following week. Instead, we will be starting the formal meeting at 6:30 p.m. This will also mean we can end the meeting a little bit earlier as there's no pertinent business that we need to cover during committee of the whole, and I'm sure that's around the session where we kind of want to end a little bit earlier because we don't have as much legislation because the forum closed. But just make sure your committees are on time for that 6:30 meeting. Be there by 6:20, 6:25 to really make sure you're sitting in your chair and you're ready to start and conduct business. I know we like to sometimes chat, and that's beautiful, but we don't have that 1 hour period for that week. And then beyond that, our last meeting is April 23rd. We are so close to the end before the 68th session. I have promised you all food, and that will happen. Yay! So that's really exciting. I'm looking over the menu. If you have any thoughts, feelings, food allergies you'd like to run by me and Gabe, then please let me know. But we'll just have a nice little end of session celebration as a win hurrah of the session. But yeah, that's about it for that. Any questions? Okay. We will move on then to 3.4, report from Government Oversight Chairperson Bobbitt.
No report.
Okay, we'll move to 3.5, report from Academic Affairs Chairperson Grajeda.
Academic Affairs is going to merge with Student Services for the remainder of our committee meetings for the session.
Thank you. Are there any questions about that? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to 3.6, report from Diversity, Empowerment, and Inclusion Chairperson Haynes.
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. So some of the updates from me, I will be attending the Campus Climate Summit on April 18th. It'll be here in the RSC at 11 a.m. So y'all will hear a report from me on that the week after the 18th, so I guess the last week that we have Senate. So woo. Regarding our agencies, all of our agencies are hard at work trying to do elections and whatnot. So I believe for everyone, all of their nomination periods have closed, and they will be doing their elections for their next executive boards pretty soon. Other than that, kind of the same as last week for International Student Union. Interfest is coming up. Please, please, please go and support Interfest. And then Halo is having their Lotteria night tonight. So unfortunately, we can't be there because we're here. But again, CISA Puede Day is coming up, and they need volunteers. If any of y'all want to volunteer, please let me know so that I can forward that information to their president. ASC had, what was it? It was Flavors of Asia this week on Monday. So if you missed it, so sorry. It was good food, y'all. And that's all I have for my report right now.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to 3.7, report from Student Services Chairperson Adriana Owens. This morning, as Speaker Owens said, we met with a psychology clinic to discuss some questions regarding the proposed amendments made by Vice President Fawn this past week. This discussion opened up some larger, broader discussions regarding the scholarship and the ways to improve the process to account for certain concerns. Ultimately, these decisions will be discussed and explained once we get to the legislation later tonight. I urge you all to make sure to ask any questions you may have once we get to that portion, and be extensive to make sure that it is a convoluted process, but I want to make sure everyone is aware of what's going on. During student services today, the committee passed the bike rack installation and commuter kindness, aka BRIC legislation, unanimously with a few amendments to clarify some language. We should see that legislation on the floor next week for a final vote. During the Accessibility and Disability Pride Task Force, we will be going over how we want to draft a recap of all the work that the task force did this year and submit a recommendation to the next session on projects and other work we believe need to be done in the future. As a reminder, I will be gone for a conference April 12th through the 19th, so if you need me for anything, feel free to reach out via email, but I might be slower to respond. I'm open to questions. Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to 3.8, report from the central office. Dr. Fonseca.
I think just two things really quick. This week is Food for Fine, so if folks have any parking tickets, please make sure that you take care of those by donating to the Shotgun Support Locker. You can do that either at Parking Services or in the SJ office or in 216 this week. So please remind folks about that. And then the second thing, the student government office is going to begin, its physical office, is going to begin its transition period. And so next Friday, it will actually close until the new session starts. They did not get eviction notices. Don't listen to the Senate leadership who said they got a piece of paper on their door. But they are going to begin vacating the office and moving out of the space while we bring people in to clean the office for the next session to move in the following week. So if you stop by 219 for whatever reason, there will be a sign on the door that say it will be closed starting next Friday, and we're directing people to 216 if folks still need anything from SGA. But I'll still be available via email, so if you have things, they'll also probably be next door if they need a space to work out of. But if you still need them, they'll still be available via email. That's not in the physical office space because we will be closing it in preparation for transition. And I think that's all I got, unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to section 4, public forum and presentations. Public forum provides a chance for individuals to have the privilege of speaking before the Senate. This is a time for the association to listen to what the community has to say, and to that we offer undivided respect and attention. I would like to remind everyone that although we allow the speaker the privilege to use this platform, the opinions of the speaker do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the association or the university. First, we have Patrick Murphy. You have the floor.
Hi, I'm not coming as a senator or really just even a student, just kind of a person, I guess. Some trigger warnings. This speech does contain subject matter that may be upsetting to some people, including mental health, therapy, depression, and thoughts of suicide. If you do not wish to hear this, I understand if you need to leave. This time of the semester, there's usually an uptick in cases of students struggling with their mental health. But for some reason, even though as a society we have made an incredible effort to be more open with our struggles, mental health is still seen as taboo to talk about. I still feel scared to share my feelings with other people. If you had a heart rate monitor, you'd probably be nervous. In full transparency, unless it's about one specific thing, I really only talk to 2 people about my feelings on a regular basis, one of which is a therapist. Opening up to people terrifies me that they'll view me as differently or discard me because they don't want to have to deal with my issues. Tonight, I am going to share with everyone my own struggles in hopes that some of that stigma is lost. I have been battling depression for a very long time. It started in high school and unfortunately has followed me here to WSU. I hate to admit it, but there have been a couple close calls with my battle, even during my time while serving in the Senate. Many times over the last few years, I couldn't find the energy to keep fighting. I just felt like giving up and giving in. I have routinely gone to therapy sessions for a while now, so I hope that I've gotten to a better place. I want to say that I'm back to 100%. I want to soothe people's newfound anxieties about me. There's so many things that I want, but what I don't want to be is a liar. I like to think that the worst of it is behind me. To be fully honest, I don't know if or even when they will be. I'm on my own journey with it, and it involves going at my own pace, and that's okay. Routinely going to therapy and just being open with my struggles is something that has literally saved my life on more than one occasion. Mental health struggles are something that almost everybody goes through at least once in life. Because of that, it shouldn't be something that you should keep to yourself. So please, I implore you, speak with someone about it. Look around you. You may not realize it, but there are so many people that care about you, maybe as a friend, but most of all as a person and as a human being. Not just in this room, not just in this building, not just even on this campus, but the entire world. There's absolutely zero shame in talking about your struggles. If you feel more comfortable talking to a professional, in my personal opinion, not in any capacity as in Senate, but CAPS is a good way to get affordable therapy on campus. That is what I use. I want to close with a quote from Sam Reed, who runs a YouTube channel called The Studio Review. He signs off every video with the same words: even when it doesn't feel like it, it's going to be okay. I'd like to offer an addition to that. Even when it's hard, and especially when it feels impossible, when you're told that there's a light at the end of the tunnel but you can't really see it, when you try to look on the bright side but you only see darkness, just remember that it may not get better tomorrow or next week or even next month, but eventually it's going to be okay. Thank you.
What an important message. Thank you so much for that. We will move to Josh Mallard. You have the floor.
Hi, mine's not as cool. Just want to remind everyone, with registration coming up, in the past I have written stuff in regards to academic advising, and it was shut down. There are a lot of students do have problems, and if they do have problems, please speak to people and write them down. Especially right now, there are a lot of people who go to advising, and also, okay, I should say, I'm speaking half and half, sort of as a senator, but also sort of as a student. There are people who, sign up for advising and their advisor will move the class. Or a lot of problems I've seen with people are their degree works, the numbers are wrong with the course catalog, or the class hasn't been offered for 5-6+ years. But I just make sure to reach out to people and make sure that they're getting the resources that they need. Because I'll say right now, I've been in some massive email chains where I was yeah, I need to take this class. And oh, that's not offered. You need to figure out how to get another class. And I'm well, you're my advisor. Tell me how to do that. And oh, well, I can't do that. Someone else has to. I'm well, that's not what you're here for. You're an advisor, and you're here to help me build my class. And this isn't just with us. I know, we've talked with the engineering college. The engineering college has had a lot of issues with advising. But I just wanted to come briefly say that. Just make sure to reach out to make sure that people are getting the classes that they need, because we want to make sure that people graduate on time and are not struggling to find a class that isn't offered. And also, fun fact, not a lot of people know about this, but tell people you can blue card a class, and what that means is if you can get enough people and the professor is willing to have the class, you can then sign up for the class even though it's not in the degree or not in the registrar's page. But there's a lot of ways around it, but I guess I'll stand for questions if people have them.
Are there any questions? Senator Enzi?
Do you know what that number is on number of people that would require to do that for each class? Or is that different depending on what college?
Are you talking about blue carding? So with blue card, it's up to the professor, really. So the professor can, so let's say, so a professor has to, like, I think, teach a minimum number of classes, but let's say you want this one class to be offered. I'll put critical minerals out there. Critical minerals is a geology class that's never offered, but even if there's just 5 people and the professor says, you know what, I have time, I'll teach the class. So if you get like a lot of people to do it, you can convince the professor. If the professor doesn't want to, you might be able to go to a higher level, like, well, I wanted to say the dean, but just someone else and say, hey, we really want this class and we want it to be blue carded. But I don't think there's like a minimum or a maximum.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to speak during public forum? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to, there is nothing on the consent agenda. So we'll move directly on to section 6, consideration of pending business. We'll move to 6.1.
Act on request to approve AR-67-019, condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Is the other here? And you have the floor.
Hello. Politics currently are very confusing, as I hope you all know. And the United States has been very unfriendly and very confused about how it wants to treat its allies. And as a university, we have power to speak, and we have a loud voice. And we can and I believe we should we should condemn Russia and what they've done to Ukraine. Because Russia has done many terrible things to Ukraine, including attacking civilians, civilian infrastructure, and abducting tens of thousands of children.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Chairperson Bobbitt.
So we're a couple years into this conflict now. Could you kind of go into why you felt it was important now, and then kind of what you're looking for with this legislation?
Well, I know a bill condemning the war was never, or a piece of legislation was not made last year, and I believe there was not one made the year before, so I figure it may as well happen now, or better late than never. And what I hope to achieve is to show the U.S. federal government that people want them to support Ukraine in the war against Russia.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, where? Oh, Senator Sauls.
Do you have like a survey that shows this is for students and this is what students want? Or is this just a general like opinion?
This is just a general opinion then.
Any other questions? Senator Island.
Do you have any further plans to, I guess, kind of involve students in kind of the condemnation that's outlined in the last Be It Further Resolve? Or rather, how do you feel that we as an association can kind of bolster this piece of legislation should it be passed?
You could call your representatives at the federal levels and ask them to support Ukraine, or really whatever else people were encouraged to do in the condemnation of the Israel's war against Hamas last year that we passed.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. We will move into debate on this item as this is this item's second read. Is there anyone who'd like to speak during this time? Going once? Twice? Okay. That moves us directly into a formal vote on the piece of legislation itself.
Voting is open. And just for clarity, the vote count is now 12 for simple majority and 15 for 2/3. Need one more. All right, with 12 in favor, 2 against, and 5 abstentions, the motion passes.
Congratulations. Now we move to 6.2.
Act on request to approve AR-67-020 diversity training.
You also have the floor once again.
Hello again. So, recently, so our campus is relatively diverse, and I have heard from my constituents that the students around them need to know more about their minority peers. And the university already has a diversity training program somewhere on their website. Potentially. It may be gone now. As recently, of course, you've all heard about the anti-DEI efforts in state, local, and federal politics. But besides that, we can still ask the university to put an optional diversity training program to comply with the law. Of course, it will be optional, next to the required Title IX training in the MyWSU page, so that there could be an optional training section and a mandatory training section for if people want to take the optional trainings.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Chairperson Bobbitt?
So looking at the therefores on this resolution, it seems like there's not like a whole lot of kind of requests in this resolution. Could you talk to kind of your desire to put it forward and what steps you've taken to achieve these goals? And like, have you talked to anyone? Have you reached out to administrators or someone like that to see if it was possible to get this without a resolution?
No, I haven't, but everything is so volatile right now. I assume that a simple request with a relatively broad goal would be useful, or at least the best that a resolution could be at this time.
Any other questions? Vice President Fawn?
Yeah, so I had a question about the second whereas line where it says 18.3% of undergraduate students identify as Hispanic. Can you clarify a little bit about why we only include the line about Hispanic students and none of our other minority students that we have on campus?
Oh yes, that for a brief period that was the only statistics I had about minority demographics at WSU, but I've been provided with a sheet of other minority or of demographics at WSU, and I want to, or later during the debate period, I want to amend to add a statistic.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
As you mentioned, the university is kind of going through an audit of a lot of our DEI initiatives, and many of the pages associated with such resolutions are currently down for review. Do you believe that, kind of given the current climate, this legislation should proceed?
I do not believe that preventing it from proceeding would do any good. Like I said, it's a simple request with a broad goal that hopefully the university can figure out how to best accomplish it within whatever constraints they face.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. We'll move into the debate period on this item, as this is this bill's second read. Would anyone like to speak during this time? Senator Lewis.
I would like to amend line 3 to read, whereas 45% of students in 2024 were non-white.
Is that the end of your proposed amendment?
Yes.
Advisor Fonseca, do you have that? Beautiful. Do I have a second? Seeing it a second by Chairperson Grajeda, we'll move directly into the debating period on this amendment. Would anyone like to speak during this time? Chairperson Bobbitt.
If I may kind of direct a general question into the atmosphere for maybe someone to answer it. Could you go, or could somebody go into the reason that this specific statistic should be included into this legislation?
I'll give Senator Lewis, the author of this amendment, a chance to respond if you would like.
Well, I assumed that a broader, or I could break it down into every single ethnicity on or listed on this page, but I assume that the non-white total is enough for providing, for representing how many minority students there are.
Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this amendment? Senator Island.
I think also kind of generally kind of mirroring Senator Bobbitt's, Chairperson Bobbitt's sentiments. I think it may potentially be more effective to kind of make the amendment potentially more in alignment with the preceding two lines. So potentially having a statistic that reflects more generally underrepresented populations, or instead simply striking line 3 to kind of make the whereas points flow a little bit more cohesively.
Any other discussion on this item? Vice President Fawn.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of concerns of changing line 3 to be, say, the language of non-whites, because I think it would, if we were to list out some demographics, I think it would be more effective listing them out more individually instead of potentially saying against a certain demographic as that. I'd rather have it more listed out. That way you get a better breakdown of the percentages of those demographics anyways, but I'm open to hear more thoughts about it too.
Senator Mallard.
I am in agreement with a more of a broken down method.
Senator Hatch.
I would also say that I would like to see it a bit more broken down, but I also think it's important to keep the line in because I think that it adds a bit of perspective upon the issue on how many students something like this could affect. Just keeping statistics inside of legislation just kind of gives them a little more credibility.
I'll allow one more speaker. Senator Mallard.
If we would like to do that, if I may, would you be okay with me like reading it out and then we can amend it?
Yes.
So
Without rescinding your motion, I would like to keep the topic germane to this particular amendment. But Senator Lewis.
I'd like to kill my amendment.
You'd like to rescind it? Okay.
Yes, rescind it.
Then we are back open to discussion. Senator Mallard, please share.
I'd like to propose an amendment of line 3 to say, whereas of undergraduates at Wichita State University, 0.6% are, sorry, this is in, I believe that's American Indian and Alaskan Native. 7.8% is Asian non-Hispanic, 7.1% Black non-Hispanic, 0.1% Hawaiian, 18.1% Hispanic.
I'm going to interrupt you just so you can speak a little bit slower.
Do you want me to just email you this document?
That would be stunning. Thank you.
5.6% multiple race non-Hispanic, and 4.6 international.
Thank you. Is there a second to this amendment? Seeing a second by Senator Stinnett, we'll move directly into the debating period on this item. Is there anyone who'd like to speak during this time? Chairperson Bobbitt.
I have some mixed feelings on this amendment. I think I'd prefer more generalized statement saying that Wichita State has a diverse student population instead of these specific breakdowns. There's a couple different reasons for that. While I appreciate the availability of undergraduate statistics, I do want to remind the body that our graduate students are a large and diverse population on campus as well, and it would feel weird for me as a graduate center to not push for inclusion of our graduate students. And then beyond that, I do once again question the kind of desire and the climate in which we are pursuing this legislation. I feel like it may be more appropriate to have a broader, inclusive picture of Wichita State than a specific, these are our demographics as they stand this year.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time? Senator Pizzini.
I think just to make it a little clearer, maybe we just include the 3 largest percentages of the demographics that we have available. And to Senator Bobbitt's point, we also have on this document the graduate percentages for demographics, and we could also include that. Again, the top 3%, just to make it a little clearer, because this document does have, there's probably more than 10 different line items on here.
Before we do that, I'll request Advisor Fonseca put that on the screen. I feel like it'd be better just to have a visual and a little bit more accessible. So I'll let Senator Henley speak, and then we'll make sure to get that while she speaks.
Yeah, I like Senator Pizzini's idea on it, especially because usually the diversity training programs that they'll put up are usually centered around the highest amount that are at the university. And so I don't know how I feel about putting in things that like the university wouldn't even include in the diversity training, if they even choose to put it in there.
Any other thoughts on this amendment? Senator Island?
I think a potentially amiable middle ground, and I'm willing to hear additional thoughts about this, would potentially be to, if we want to include statistical evidence, potentially, instead of doing the three most major groups, potentially doing a larger statistic about the percentage of students at Wichita State that identify with underrepresented groups. The first reason why I think this may be effective is, one, to kind of fall in line with the enrollment percentages presented in line one, and then secondarily, just kind of showing the magnitude of underrepresented students that would not only encompass both undergraduate and graduate populations, but also could show not only ethnic underrepresentation, but could also potentially include minority demographics that fall under disability categorizations, or, you know, things related potentially to sexuality, gender affiliation, things like that, that are more generally spoken about in other language within the resolution.
Senator Lewis.
I love Senator Allen's idea. I want to include such a statistic, but I have no clue where to find that number.
Chairperson Adriana Owens.
Considering what Gabe brought up to the screen, is statistics that include both undergraduate and graduate students. I feel as if we use those percentages, it would make sure to include both demographics while also showing the overarching amount of diversity we have on campus. I think I'm pro listing how much amazing diversity we have on campus, and keeping it vague I don't feel does anything, considering the fact that we're not forcing anyone to do diversity training. It's optional. We're encouraging it. So even if we're facing divisive things in the future, I think this should be safe if we just list out the facts of the diversity on campus.
I'll speak to that and then get to Senator Hatch. Senator Island, you really read my mind there of feeling like for those diversity trainings, I love to always participate in those and do love the representation of different demographics, including ability status and LGBTQ plus IA community, and then women in a lot of those communities as well. So I agree, I think we should add a little bit more. And then I think we can definitely add on to this or potentially start over on this piece. But ultimately, I'd love to get Senator Hatch's opinion as well.
So I understand like concerns about adding some of this language because of the current climate and the situation going around with the state legislature, but I also think that that's more of a reason to pass something like this. I think that it's important to show how the Senate feels about the things that are going on with this, and voicing legislation that the university may or may not act on, but will have to read and understand where we're coming from is important.
Thank you. Chairperson Bobbitt?
To some of the earlier comments that are made, while this document does reflect both undergraduate and graduate statistics, the implementation of that language within the resolution itself and both the first whereases only targets undergraduate students.
I'll allow one person to speak for the rest of this amendment, and then we'll move on to voting. I'll go to Chairperson Adriana Owens.
My thought was to potentially indicate a friendly amendment to include these statistics as an alternative, considering it would show both undergraduate and graduate students. I don't exactly know how to do that. I guess I would have to ask the original amendment person if they were okay with that. I don't know who that is.
So ultimately, I would truly recommend us to kind of get into a collective here. I think we all have a general idea that we'd like to add more statistics, and I think that's amazing. So either I need a motion forward to vote this down, or to vote this and then amend from there. But ultimately, I'd like us to be cohesive in that approach. So I'm going to move directly into voting so we can get to that.
Voting is open. With 9 in favor, 8 against, and 4 abstentions, the motion fails.
Okay, this brings us back into the broader thesis of this bill. Are there any amendments to propose or discussion? I'll go to Senator Island and then Chairperson Adriana Owens.
Kind of going back to I know Senator Lewis posited a point that she was unaware of how we could receive information about how we could reflect more widely a percentage of underrepresented students. But I think one way to kind of posit this statistical information, we could potentially pose a question to the central office about the amount of students that are eligible to vote in underrepresented student categorizations in the election. I'm not sure if that would be an accurate reflection, but I think that's just one place to start if we're interested in putting statistics in that would kind of go towards the desires of what I'm kind of hearing from discussions about what people are wanting.
I'll give Advisor Fonseca some time to pull that up. I likely think, and we'll go to Chairperson Adriana Owens.
I was going to make an amendment, but now I have a question. So I guess.
Go ahead.
Oh, can I? It's towards Gabe, if that's appropriate.
You can certainly ask it, and we'll see if
I'll
you
ask it in general, and then we can see from there. My general question is that I know that we've had discussions about this in the past, about how there's not really a metric to kind of count or like the amount of LGBT plus or disabled students on campus. It's kind of harder to track considering we use like different metrics. I'm wondering if that has a correlation between that and a lot of other students who have said that they didn't receive the underserved or underrepresented ballot. And I'm wondering if that is just because of like when you apply to school, it has something to do with that, or if it's kind of unrelated, is my general question.
Well, I can speak to a little bit of that and give it to Advisor Fonseca for him to share. A lot of those categories are based on self-identifying factors for your, typically whenever you type in your WCU demographics on your page, you're able to include those demographic items like sexuality and gender identity and ability status and those kinds of things. It is ultimately up to the students. It is traditionally hard to garner exact numbers for underserved populations. But I'll go to Advisor Fonseca if he has something as well.
Yeah, that is correct. It is difficult. The university does not track sexual orientation status. Those are self-disclosed thing, and it's not a sector and banner for us to be able to pull to provide it into the ballot. Quite frankly, I'm not 100% sure what alternative we would have to seek some of that information. Right, because we don't make students register to vote, so there's not a mechanism for students to even tell us that from the election standpoint. The application of that particular piece of who can hold the seat comes from just the declaration of the candidate, not necessarily from the voter standpoint, because it is a little harder because there's not a university metric right now that tracks either of those components. And I have the answer from the earlier question, if that's okay. This was as of, I just found the 2024 numbers because it was the first one that popped up, but it's about 7,917 students.
Senator Mallard.
I do have the statistics of percentage of undergraduate underserved. I don't have the full amount of graduate, but also for those of you who are wondering what underserved is, just so that we can get that out there. Underserved includes underrepresented minorities, so American Indian, Alaskan Native, Black, non-Hispanic, Hawaiian, Hispanic, and first-generation students and students from low-income families. Families' incomes 125% or less of the poverty level based on family size. So I'm going to propose an amendment. Line 3 again. I think that's what it is. Sorry, I just closed the packet. My computer's being crazy. Yeah, I think it's line 3 is where it was. Whereas percentage of undergraduate underserved of 2024 is 56.2%.
Did you send that to Gabe? Stunning. Do I have a second? Seeing multiple seconds, we'll move directly into deliberations on this item. It'll take a little bit more for him to get that up, so we'll just wait a second on that, but I'd love to get thoughts on the table. Chairperson Bobbitt.
Let's pretend I'm Senator Bobbitt. Once again, I am concerned that we're at this point purposely excluding graduate students. I feel it's important that we do include that population in our overall representation, and then kind of a question to the discrepancy between the statistics that were provided versus the answer that was given by the central office. My understanding is that 7,000 something of our students are identified as underserved of 17,000, which is significantly less than 50%. Just kind of a question on that.
I'm going to share some thoughts. I love the idea of this legislation. I don't think it's fully fleshed out quite yet. I think what I need is that statistics from when it hits the floor. I need a little bit more to me. I know we're debating the resolution or the amendment, but when I'm looking at this, I think it's a fantastic idea. I think that we need to provide this optional training, but ultimately I will not be voting in favor of any amendments simply because I agree with Chairperson Bobbitt's sentiment. It's not fully fleshed out enough. We can have, I'll talk a little bit more about some options that I would propose to you all after this amendment. But those are just my thoughts. And ultimately, we have a lot more on the docket. I would like to give this its full chance to shine, but I'm not comfortable with having to hash this out on the floor. I truly believe it should have this information. And now we have that feedback, and that's fantastic. But those are my thoughts, and I'd like to get anyone else's. Chairperson Adriana Owens.
I wouldn't necessarily say I agree with the speaker regarding this. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to hash this out on the floor, considering now that instead of hashing it out during committee, we have larger body to have reach consensus regarding it. We obviously are going to vote on this legislation and specifically this amendment. It seems as if this amendment doesn't work for everyone, so let's vote on it and decide what works better so that we can include all populations regarding this, which includes graduate students, which it seems like people want to add. So there's ways that we can do it. We just gotta put our brains together and we can get to it.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak on this amendment? Seeing none, we'll move directly into voting on this amendment. And before we continue, Josh, if you could share again what the amendment states, just for the body, because I know we don't have it up here and I want to remain accessible in this space. Gabe, do you have that amendment that you could read out? That's okay, I know you have a lot of tabs open and things like that. Okay, voting.
Voting is now open. With 6 in favor, 11 against, and 4 abstentions, the motion fails.
Okay, bringing us back, Senator Stinnett.
I would really love for this to, I guess I'm going to kind of echo the speaker's sentiment. I would love for this to have a opportunity to shine, but I do believe that we have a lot of information that I'm getting a general consensus of that people are wanting put into this resolution. And unless we have that information right now that we're able to start making amendments to this, I do believe that we should table this. And I'm welcome for anyone to do that. I'd like some more general feedback before an amendment is proposed. I'm willing to make it, but I want to get a more general idea of what's going on first.
I will be making a motion, but I'd like to get one more thought on the table before I do so. Chairperson Bobbitt.
Kind of preempting your motion, I would make a motion to recommit to insert committee here, DEI committee. Thank you.
So not to table, you want to recommit it. To diversity, empowerment, and inclusion. Do I have a second? Seeing a second by Senator Murphy. This is debatable, so I'd love to get any thoughts on the table. And Chairperson Baba, I'll give you the floor first.
Kind of echoing the sentiments of the speaker, we have a very busy legislative packet today, and as much as I would like to engage in a conversation about what all language should appear in this bill, I don't believe that the Senate floor is the best place to do that. I think that giving everyone a chance to regroup and kind of research and implement some of these changes in a committee setting may expedite the process and allow us to reach consensus faster.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak? Senator Lewis.
I agree. I think it should go back to committee. I think we still have time to, or like week-wise, to get it back to the floor. So, yeah, I didn't finish it.
I'll allow one more person to speak before we move to a vote. Senator Mallard.
Yeah, there's a lot of statistics to come through, and I'm over here like just scrolling through a lot of documents. I just sent them all to Evelyn, but I think that we need to make sure that we not only include the underrepresented, which is really just the demographics, like the Hawaiian, Hispanic, the first generation, and the income, but also see if we can find any form of information in regards to, just identities, because there is stuff out there as well as disabilities. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion, it'd be great to maybe even include how many people apply for that. But there's a lot of stuff that we still need to hash out, as well as even seeing if there is already a diversity training and seeing if we can add more therefores, and also see if we can include what that diversity training is and where we can find that.
The motion on the floor is to recommit to the DEI committee. I'm moving to a vote on this motion.
Voting is open.
Requires a simple majority vote.
With 20 in favor and 1 abstention, the motion passes.
Okay, this will be on the floor our very last meeting, the 23rd. So we'll see it in committee the 16th. So make sure everybody who's in the DEI committee or any other friends who'd like to join have those thoughts on the table, and you're really supporting Senator Lewis to get those thoughts and to really get consensus before we see it for our very last Senate meeting. This moves us to 6.3.
Act on request to approve SB-67-182, amendments to the association's funding regulations.
Our author is here, and you have the floor.
Hi everyone. So unfortunately I wasn't able to go to Legislative Affairs because I had a lab that coincided with that time. So I'll have Matthew answer any questions on just the changes of the bills and things like that, and have him speak on that just because he was there and in attendance, and then I can speak on anything else before the changes of Legislative Affairs.
Yeah, so Legislative Affairs made a few changes to the bill. So one of the changes that they made was to the individual funding section. They changed the language to where the individual funding budget will be allocated equally into the fall in the spring semester, and the amount allocated in each fall semester, fall and spring, will be $10,000 minimum. So one thing to note is that would be different than what it was originally, where it would be split equally into the fall and spring semester according to the president's budget. So that was one change that was made. Another change that was made was language was added to organizational funding, where that change would prohibit partisan activities in a similar way that it is prohibited for appropriations funding. In addition, we struck out some other language where it mentioned one of the articles, which isn't really relevant anymore for organizational funding, since a lot of organizational funding will be funded through this leftover amounts from the stimulus fund. Additionally, they unstruck the portion where it said no more than 65% of all individual organizational funding available in a given fiscal year shall be allocated prior to December 31st. But those were pretty much the changes that were made in legislative affairs.
I did have a question, and before we get to the general body's questions as well. In the appropriations funding processes, I'd love to get your thoughts on the Tier 3 maximum. I know a lot of our organizations typically request funding above that $20,000 maximum, but an addendum to that, we're going into a year with budget cuts as well. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that number, where you arrived there, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so the $20,000 was just basically a $5,000 increase from the max from when before we decided to change all of these maximums of $15,000. Generally, when organizations request, I have made exceptions, but unfortunately, the reality of it is most of the time they don't even get a full 15,000. And so just allowing the 20,000 not to exceed that just made sense applicably. In addition, going into the next fiscal year, it's just not feasible or equitable. And then on top of that, there are always a lot of requests. There's always more than 60 requests each year. And with such a limited budget, it wouldn't be fair to those organizations if another organization was to be able to request maybe like half the budget. And so just having that maximum there to help with some of the applicable processes. Realistically, within my 2 years, I've never seen Finance Commission actually allocate more than 20,000.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Senator Island?
In Chapter 1, Section 2, Part 4, what was the decision to lower the allocation minimum for individual funding?
Yeah, so in legislative affairs, when we changed it, originally it just reverted, the original thoughts that we had were to revert the original language for individual funding. Then we had that conversation on where, due to budget cuts, many within legislative affairs felt like a $10,000 minimum would be better than a $15,000 minimum, not as to not restrict whoever. Not restrict the president's budget as much as if it was a $15,000 minimum, but yeah.
Any other questions? Senator Enzi?
So going back to the appropriations funding there, so since you've essentially made the Tier 3 exception into another tier, why would you not put that in there as a Tier 4? That's first part of the question. I have a second one. I'll just raise my hand again.
I'll make sure to call on you.
Having another tier is not something that we considered, just because the tier system with this current fiscal year has so far worked. I haven't heard of any feedback that was negative about the tier system in terms of having the maximum, and so it was not something that I had considered when writing this bill. Additionally, again, Finance Commission just historically hasn't been able to exceed that 20,000 maximum anyway in terms of actually giving those funds to certain student organizations, and so just writing that into the bylaws so that There are more guidelines for the next treasurer in the Finance Commission. Additionally, again, like I said, it's so having another tier organization doesn't, in my mind, make sense because the tier 3 is already covering, and if you remember, the tier system is to help cover the definitions of student orgs. So tier 1 is just general meetings, tier 2 is general meetings and events, and then tier 3 is general meetings, events, and conferences. I haven't heard of another, I guess, larger line item that also encompasses all 200 something RSOs that RSOs typically need for funding, which is why we have that exception line, just in case there are anything, which is why we didn't do another tier 4.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, Senator Enzi. I didn't forget.
So that didn't really answer my question. My question was, you essentially have created a tier here by saying that you do have a maximum, with the whole intent of the exceptions being that those are exceptions to the rule, that it's not the rule, like that's not something that should be happening on the regular. But now you've made it into a 4th tier without calling it tier 4. So my question is, why wasn't that considered as something to be done and creating a 4th tier if you're going to put a cap on everything there?
Considering another tier would have to recreate another definition, which, again, like I said, we just haven't found a reason for another tier 4 org. And realistically, the exceptions from last year were maybe 4 to 5 organizations versus the 60-something other organizations that fell within tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 without asking for any exceptions.
Yeah, I have something to add. So in addition to that, for each of our tier systems, we have different levels of what we expect from them. For example, one tier requests only general meetings, other one's general meetings and events and stuff, and other ones like general meetings, events, and conferences. If we added tier 4, my concern would be having more expectations for that tier 4 to add upon to a tier 3. With having this exception, we wouldn't have to add an extra requirement to add on to the tier 4. It would just be a amount exception, but not necessarily what they would do, like have an exception.
Senator Enzi?
My last question would then be, so I know that the budget's looking tight right now, and that's completely understandable why you would want to say, oh, let's cap it at $20,000. But have you thought about in 3 years when we have a budget surplus, and there are tons of organizations that are asking for this, and then Senate has to come and revisit this before you're allowed to be able to do that? Do you really want to lock the treasurer into being stuck by that here in 3 years? Because I believe that in the coming years, our treasurer will be smart and not allocate money where it shouldn't be going. And if we don't have the ability to allocate more than $20,000 to specific organizations, then they won't do it. But if you're having organizations constantly requesting that amount, it would make sense to at least leave it in to be entertained that when we have a budget surplus in the future, as I hope we should, that you would be able to allocate that then.
The request can't be more than 20,000.
Any other questions? Senator Henley?
I know you said that you haven't gotten any bad feedback about this tier system, but I was wondering if you had any plans to do an anonymous survey to offer it, because right now my understanding is your survey is what organization are you part of, what do you run, or what do you work as, I guess, or the president or something like that. And so it doesn't give us much of an opportunity to say if they did have any problems with it, out of fear that it might affect the committee's opinion about them next year for finance.
Yeah, so typically with that, I have received feedback that was negative, and obviously I have taken that into consideration with no retaliation, because honestly that's not fair for me to ask for feedback and then to retaliate. In addition, Finance Commission doesn't get that feedback. Finance Commission gets the information that these orgs have filled it out or not, and then if there's any consequences that need to be put in place, because the policy does require you to fill out the form, then Finance Commission is notified if they did or did not fill out the form. But all the information in there is private. It is a really good idea to send out an anonymous form, but I would hope that student organizations do feel comfortable. A lot of the feedback that I did get back were positive feedbacks, mostly to the application of the funding. I did not see, or don't even remember if there was any complaints about the tier system specifically. In addition, I think students feel comfortable enough because there were a handful of negative feedback that, I took that into consideration, just applying forward and moving forward. And so, again, I want all students to feel comfortable because in reality, I can't retaliate. Even if I quote unquote wanted to, I can't, because any consequences of funds or anything like that has to go through Finance Commission, and then that's also reported back to the Senate. So it's not a one-person process where things are just, oh, well, maybe I don't agree with you, so I don't like that, so I'm going to take away your funding. That kind of retaliation doesn't work because there are several democratic processes to ensure that that doesn't happen. In addition, students, if they feel like they were retaliated against, can also submit those complaints to the court as well, and then it would rescind any decision that had to go through 2 democratic processes.
And to add on to that, in our RSO visits, when we talked to a bunch of student organizations about how they felt about appropriations and the thoughts they had associated with that also, most of the concerns or negative feedback that we got from student organizations was more about the amount they receive rather than the tier system itself. So I know we had a couple of groups that didn't necessarily like the tier system, but most of them were more frustrated with the amount they may have received more than the tier system.
Any other questions? Senator Henley.
I appreciate the answer. I think it was really good. I just, I think there is a bias in what you're assuming that the students know or feel. And I think, like, I didn't know how that process was, and I'm in SGA. So I really do think it might be important to have some sort of anonymous thing. And I understand you're saying that you wouldn't retaliate, and you can't retaliate. But I don't necessarily see it like that. And so I don't know if all students would also
Senator
feel that
Henley,
way.
if you could make sure to phrase it in a question. Other than that, please share that in the debate period. Are there any other questions? Okay.
Can I add something real quick?
Sure.
So when it comes to appropriations times, this month we do have 6 appropriations briefings. And in those briefings, I do outline every single language and bylaw that's in our current rules and regulations, and then I also say, hey, we're also looking at these bylaws within Senate. It could be different, but if there's any differences, I'll send that information out. All these orgs have to go through these briefings so that they're up to date with all these bylaws and rules so that they're not found in violation. It's to protect them more so than us. And so with that, they are notified of the tier system, the maximums of the tier system, and how it works. And then student orgs also have a chance to ask any questions that I may be able to answer. And so these student orgs are notified, and I give them as much information as I can to ensure that they do know our processes. But whether or not they actually utilize the processes is up to them. But they always have my email. I respond fairly quickly, depending on the week that it is. And so I always make sure that students have all the available information that they need.
To Senator Henley's point, I'd like to ask a follow-up there. Would you be open to doing an anonymous form? That is feedback there from one student potentially urging that being a potential anonymous form. So would you be willing to do that, urge Finance Commission to do that in the future? Or would you think that that would be a feasible process? You've been here for 2 years, so I'd love to see more thoughts to that.
Honestly, it's not something that would be difficult to do. It'd probably be like 2 things on the Google form that says, what's your feedback for SGA, something like that. Do we have a feedback form already on the SGA website?
Yeah. So right now we have an inquiry form, so students can submit things through that way. I know one thing our administration has been trying to do is do RSO outreach. So we've been trying to reach out to every single organization to hear the concerns that they had about appropriations, about any questions about what we can do better as a SGA. I know that's not necessarily anonymous, but we've been trying to address that concern also. But anonymous form, as Treasurer Wong said, would not be a hard thing to make either.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. I'd like to move into debate period. Would anyone like to speak? I'll go to Senator Mallard.
So one thing I'd like to say is we shouldn't really work in what ifs and this could happen. But we still need to look into that to a degree. We don't know for a fact if there could be a surplus, so we can't say, oh, there's going to be a surplus in 3 years, there's going to be a surplus in 4 years. And as was stated, if there's a sort of surplus in money, there's going to be a surplus in orgs. And let's see. Also, as was stated, with the tier system, this is just in the application. This is not in the actual final funding and final deliberations. And so there's still a possibility for more if the Finance Commission wanted that. And like with the tier 4, in my opinion, I believe that at that point, become like an agency. If you think that you're doing a lot more for students, then at that point try and aim for a higher. And then also the final thing I was going to say is make sure you are voting for the student body as a whole and not for personal beliefs and viewpoints. I know that there are a lot of people in student organizations here, and appropriations, as was stated, is coming up. So make sure you're looking at this through the whole viewpoint of students. But I will say that I will vote in affirmation.
I'm going to go to Chairperson Bobbitt and then Senator Enzi.
Okay. I have a kind of lengthy explanation for why I'm making this motion, but I asked someone to take the leap of faith with me, and then I will get there. I would like to make a motion to amend Act 5, Chapter 5, Section 6, Line 6.
Could you say it slower for people so they can like scroll to the area? I saw that look too, and I was like, where are we going? The act, this section, the line again.
Yep, it's Act 5. There's some kind of disconnect between what I have. Chapter 5, go to section... one second.
What's the title of the area you're looking for?
Section 6, Funding Administration.
Okay.
And then line 6, I would like to eliminate that in its entirety.
Okay. Is there a second? By Senator Stinnett. I'll let you share in the debating period.
Okay, so you may be asking, oh, Senator Bobbitt, why are we eliminating one of our financial accountability measures? I have been a strong proponent of making sure money is going to where it's supposed to be, but in my personal opinion, in the opinion of some of the organizations I've talked to, some of the people who administer this actual section, this section is kind of an arbitrary requirement that puts a burden on our organizations. Within this current session, we had, I think, 5 or 6 organizations get suspended over failing to comply with this section. But we are asking these organizations to send us all this information, and then we do exactly nothing with it. So submit a semester report highlighting expenditures. We already require all of our organizations to submit receipts when they pay for things. Organization objectives met, programs hosted. You're required to submit all of your events through the SEB office. I had a discussion with Clarence, and he said that the SEB office is going to be starting to suspend organizations that aren't submitting requests or submitting their events. So if you're required to host at least one meeting or something every month. And if you aren't putting it on the books that you hosted your meeting, then your organization's going to get suspended. And then to the other information requested by the treasurer of the association, we have other avenues to request that information. So by putting this out there and kind of making the requests of all of our organizations, we're essentially asking for duplicate information, and there's a high potential for our organizations to run afoul and find themselves in a bad place without really an upside for keeping this language.
Vice President Fawn?
I will speak in negation of this amendment. I think having the supervisor treasurer having the ability to request this information can provide valuable feedback not only for SGA, but for and for the STEM office. I think it's overstating the fact that when organizations were asked to submit this information, even if they didn't submit the first time around, they had multiple attempts to submit this information, and I don't think it's an accurate representation to say that these organizations were completely suspended just because they forgot to fill the form out one time. They had multiple strikes. In addition, I don't believe it was a 5 number of organizations that were even suspended. It was 2 organizations at most after multiple attempts to reach out to them, not only through the supervisor treasurer, but we reached out to them through other avenues also. I'm a little hesitant. I'm hesitant to strike out this language, as we got some valuable information as an executive branch, and we made some improvements to some of our processes through this method.
Senator Hatch.
I do believe that some of these measures are kind of redundant for the reasons that Chairperson Bobbitt has brought up. However, I do also see the point coming from Vice President Fawn about the information that the treasurer can gather. I was wondering if there could be like a middle ground amendment where we allow the treasurer to request information, which would be required for them to do in a timely manner, but not make it a mandatory thing every semester, because that may be a bunch of, again, redundancies that could get them in trouble for not a whole lot of upside, as was mentioned before. Just kind of trying to find a middle ground that makes this easy for everybody to pass.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to that, and I'll get to Senator Stinnett and then Chairperson Bobbitt. I'm kind of living in the middle on this, truly. I think most likely this information is incredibly important for the executive branch to utilize to institute feedback, as Vice President Fawn stated, but there's also that side of RSOs maybe not wanting to do that because it's a potential burden to be like, oh, another form I have to fill out. But when organizations are receiving funding at such high dollar amounts, it's not abnormal to have them to submit reports about these types of processes. Sure, maybe some of those items are redundant or not necessary, but you know, I lie in the middle on this, truly. I could see it going either way. I would like the treasurer to be able to have the opportunity and to get that information, because I think that's incredibly beneficial. But I also live in a world where for appropriations, people have to defend their budgets and talk about the things that they were able to do the previous years. Ultimately, I'll probably vote against this motion simply because there's no consistent backing information to me where I'm like, yeah, this must go, or anything like that beyond it might just be a little inconvenient for some orgs. I think ultimately it does net positive, so I'm leaning more towards that area, but I'd love to get other thoughts. Senator Stinnett, and then we'll go to Chairperson Grajeda if Chairperson doesn't have anything.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm very much so in the middle ground on this. Coming as an organization president, I will be abstaining on everything, so don't, be on me about this. The form is not hard to fill out. Is it annoying? Yes. But we are receiving money from it, and it did not take an extensive period of time. So I really don't think that it is necessary to be like, these organizations are just like burdened by this or whatever. But I do believe, since we do have a lot of this information, I'd be welcome to a middle ground amendment, maybe saying like the treasurer can request, if necessary, organizations that might be suspected of kind of abusing their finances or whatever that may be. I'm just kind of open to different avenues.
Chairperson Grajeda.
I'm speaking in negation of the amendment, just because, yes, they provide all the information, but some of it goes to the treasurer, some of it goes through Finance Commission, some of it goes to SEB. So if this is going to the treasurer, I just think it's better if it all goes straight to them instead of them having to dig around through other people trying to get the information, kind of like how we were earlier, looking everywhere for statistics. It's just better in one spot.
Before we get to Vice President Vaughn and then Senator Lewis, I want to also say this is 2 times a year. You fill out a quick form, and I've seen it, Treasurer Wong has shown it to us. It's quite simple. I don't see a world where it's incredibly invasive or incredibly hard to do. Unfortunately, we did have this session a couple orgs that didn't fill it out, and we had to go through that process of potentially looking at freezing their funding or putting them in bad standing or those kinds of things. But ultimately, that may have been like outside of potential ability for the treasurer to reach out 1,000 times and then have them still not, respond. So it's just tough there. Vice President Vaughn.
Yeah, and to add some context into the 2 organizations that were suspended, the organizations that were suspended spent $0 in appropriations up to that point, and they never did respond upon being suspended for their appropriations funding. We sent out Treasurer Wong sent out multiple messages and emails to those organizations, and as I said, they did not spend any appropriations money to that point. And the form is a pretty fast and easy form to fill out. We understand that some students may have not seen the original email, and we gave multiple organizations multiple chances to fill out the survey, and the 2 orgs that ultimately were suspended never responded at all to the Supervisor Treasurer or the Finance Commission.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
I want to be clear, nowhere did I say that this form wasn't easy to fill out. I just ultimately, I have a unique perspective as a president of an organization. I did fill out this form. I also frequented and viewed many Finance Commission meetings and kind of got to see the back end of it too. But the end-all point that I'm trying to get at is this process is more or less entirely arbitrary, where I know there's been a lot of concern about not allowing the treasurer to reach out and request information. The treasurer is the end-all be-all financial officer of the association. They reserve the right in plenty of places to ask for information and enforce the bylaws of the association and our funding regulations. Changing this does not impact that ability. It may be kind of different in the way they approach it versus saying, hey, everybody has to fill this out, instead of, hey, I have a concern about this. Could you connect with me on it? But the point I'm trying to make with this is, what are we benefiting from this specific requirement? If an organization gets back to us and said, we've had lots of events, we've spent lots of money, wonderful. If an organization gets back to us and said, we haven't really done anything, we haven't really spent any money, that's okay too. Because at the end of the day, it makes no difference to us on the back end. This is being preached as an accountability measure, but there's no accountability. There's nothing that says, oh, you're going to be in trouble if you haven't done much. That's not within the ability of the treasurer, the Finance Commission, the Senate. Ultimately, we are providing resources to our students, and this specific request is more of a hindrance and an administrative backlog than it is anything that benefits our students.
Yeah, I'll say one thing. I'd like to give this space, give my speaking time to our treasurer, so they're the most authority in explaining what this actually gains from this type of information. So I'd love to give you, Treasurer Wong, a little bit of time to explain how this data helps and why it's necessary, or if you want it to be removed, also that's okay too, just to speak your opinion on the matter.
Hi, y'all. So this line item, when it was originally written in, was to ensure financial accountability on the organizations. When you as an organization are requesting at a tier 3 level, we expect you to be doing the general meetings, events, and the conferences. Now, there are tier 3 organizations that in the fall semester wasn't able to go to a conference or attend a conference, which is completely fine. They still have the spring semester to do so. However, if by the end of the spring semester they haven't done so, that would be in violation of the policies because we expect you to be able to hold you accountable to do the things that you promised to do with the funds. That's why we have the maximums to help keep it equitable for every other organization that also wants to host general meetings or events, things like that. So with this feedback, we're able to help kind of keep track. Student organizations, again, should know I send out that presentation every single year as to what the rules are, the consequences, things like that. They also have to attend an appropriations briefings before they're even allowed to apply, so they should know the rules. However, sometimes, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But the tier system is there and is defined as such because we expect at this level of funding, you should be able to hold all these things. So for example, we wouldn't want a tier 1 organization that's just holding general meetings to be spending $15,000. That realistically just doesn't make sense on a funding level or a fiscal level. And so with that, it is a way to ensure accountability with student organizations to say, hey, you said that you would do this, how are you doing on this? And if student organizations violate the tier system, there are certain consequences for that. For example, they would be ineligible to apply for the next fiscal year within that tier. So instead of maybe being a tier 3 organization, they would be bumped down to tier 2 until they can prove that they would be able to hold those conferences or attend those conferences. Things like that, just so that other organizations can receive funding that is already very limited in an equitable way. But that's why that original line item was put in there. I'm not saying this just to sway it one way or another. I'm just kind of explaining what happened when this line item was written. And so if y'all had any other comments or questions or anything like that.
Thank you, Treasurer Wong. I'll allow 2 more speakers, 1 in favor, 1 against of this amendment before we move to formal vote. Any in favor of this motion who'd like to speak? Chairperson Bobbitt.
Well, what the treasurer said is lovely. We already have an accountability process for that. It's the appropriation hearings. We pull every organization who's requesting money in and say, okay, last year we gave you this amount of money. This is what you promised us you would do with it. Did you accomplish this? If so, yes. If not, why? If the finance commissions determine that someone is in violation, then that is a perfectly acceptable time to be like, hey, you're not getting money this year. We already have these financial accountability measures built into the system, and it doesn't make sense to me to put our organizations in jeopardy because we are seeking a more expedient way to garner this information.
Anyone who'd like to speak against this motion before we move on? Seeing none, we'll go directly into voting on this amendment.
Voting is open. Missing a few. With 5 in favor, 9 against, and 6 abstentions, the motion fails.
1 second. I'd like to speak to this this legislation before I give it to the body to talk a little bit more. This was definitely a long time coming. We definitely had those task force meetings for a little bit and wanted to make those decisions ever since we first realized that appropriations funding needed to change and those kinds of things. I voted in legislative affairs to include a partisan policy for our organizational funding to address some of the concerns we had this year to ensure that no funding would be given to organizations that are going to partisan conferences. And that was something that we had discussed this year. I'd love to get feedback from you all to see what your thoughts are on that. But ultimately, and you all know this, I'm always in favor of funding bills being through the Senate, but honestly, individual and organizational funding requests are not necessary to go to the Senate with the amount that they go into our consent agenda. They're not really contentious, and I ultimately trust Finance Commission to make those snap judgments and to have those conversations. And we had talked to, as well about putting in a clause specifically outlining that the judicial branch would be your avenue in the case that you needed to make an appeal or those kinds of things, so that it's written in our bylaws. So I know some of our senators, if they're interested in making amendments or having that discussion, I'd love to see your thoughts on it. Ultimately, I will vote in favor of this legislation, and I'm really honestly proud of the work we're doing here to improve these processes. I'd still like to get some more consideration about the funding caps, because I know there were some varying thoughts and opinions about it, so I want to get to a consensus so we can move on from there. Vice President Fawn.
Yeah, so this, I'm going to get this over with while we're at it. So this will be our maximum latest time if approved. I move to extend the meeting to 10 p.m.
I second that. And then we will move, I'm just going to move us directly into voting on that.
Voting is open.
A reminder to 10 p.m.
With 20 in favor, 1 against, and 0 abstentions, the motion passes.
Just a reminder to the body, anything that gets to a point where we are looking at that 10 o'clock mark will be tabled for next week, simply because we cannot go beyond that time marker. So keep that time conscious when we're having these discussions. Anyone who would like to speak in favor of this legislation? Senator Stinnett.
I have a point of information.
Yes, of course. Please share.
For our new legislation coming up for its first read, if that has to get tabled, would they still have adequate time for that to get both reads if it had to get sent back to a committee? Well, actually, hold on.
So for both of our new businesses, they'll be, oh, that's actually a good question. We won't be meeting for legislative affairs this following Monday, but we'd be able to get it in before that April 23rd deadline. It would just be a pretty tight squeeze there. But thank you for mentioning that. That's a great point. But for our appointment legislation, that legislation would be moved to next week. I'm so sorry. Hypothetical, maybe we can get through it. So I'd like to move any consideration, thoughts, and feelings about this legislation that we need to get on the floor before we move to a vote. Senator Enzi.
I move to amend line 334 to strike not to exceed $20,000.
Do I have a second to that amendment? Seconded by Senator Beatty. Would you like to speak to that? Mm-hmm. Yes, as you're authoring it.
Yeah, I'm basically making this amendment because as we may not have $20,000 to give organizations in this coming year, we may in the next year. And again, this is not a cap on, as people said, the amount that somebody can get, but I highly doubt that appropriations is going to end up giving an organization more than they request. That just seems like simple logic to me.
Anyone who'd like to speak against this amendment, please raise your hand. Anyone who'd like to speak in favor of this amendment? Senator Beatty.
For some of our larger organizations, 20,000 as a maximum request seems a little tight. I know, at least for Baja, that's generally near minimum, like operating levels of request. So even if it's not guaranteed to get funded to 20,000, I think we should give organizations the chance to fight for every dollar that they think they need. And ultimately, the Finance Commission will decide whether they're right in requesting that much or whether they're out of their bounds. But I think organizations, many or multiple of our organizations will struggle to continue as organizations if they cannot request more than $20,000.
Did we have a question over here? Thoughts? Okay, Senator Barnes.
I have a question of information of how much total was spent last year for appropriations, what the amount was.
Treasurer Wong, if you have that answer, or Advisor Fonseca. And just give a minute so they can pull it up. And do you have that information, or should I move on to the next person while you get that? A clarifying question. Okay, no worries.
Did you want the amount spent or did you want the budget?
Make sure to use your mic for the, no, you're fine.
Could you do both by any chance?
The budget last year, I believe, was $180,000, and then the actual amount spent, we would have to pull that up.
Okay, thank you.
Could you also pull up the requests amount, like the total request amount? I'm morbidly curious.
To clarify, is that from last year or this year?
This year from appropriations. Advisor Fonseca.
For the amount requested, it was around $570,000, and then we had a budget of $200,000 for this year. Last year was $180,000, and then central office would have to pull up the actual, like down to the last cent, how much was spent.
Thank you. Chairperson Bobbitt?
In addition, we did add extra funds on top of that 200,000. I believe it was 70,000. Yeah.
Yes, I believe that's why, yes, could you pull that up with the dollar amount as well? Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Anyone else who'd like to speak on this amendment? Senator Mallard.
I'm just speaking in negation because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was stated that large organizations need a lot of money, but you're now decreasing the maximum from 20,000 to 10,000, and are you saying because now it says expectations to tier 3 maximum may be made at the discretion of treasurer, so now you're saying that that means that they can ask for any exception?
So to clarify, are you stating that because tier 3 has organizations may request funding up to $10,000, the exception would include any dollar amount? The exception line still exists, that not to exceed $20,000 would not. So it would subvert back to if an organization requested $1 billion or something like that, the request would be in line because it's as long as they receive that exception, if that makes sense. I literally, the second you said that, I was like, I get what you're saying, but then I got it. Anyone else who would like to speak in the debate period? Senator Hatch.
I guess this might be a point of information. If they're not allowed to request more than $20,000, does that mean that they're not allowed to put that in their presentation, that they might need more than that to function? Or is that just on the application you can only say $20,000, but when you come in and talk to Finance Commission, you can present higher?
I'll answer to the best of my ability, and then I'll give it to Treasurer Wong if you can provide any clarification. From my understanding, some organizations do come in and have a higher dollar amount, but because the request amount, that's the amount that you can get. I presume that they can have an amount, as Treasurer Wong was stating, because the request amount is $20,000, they can still put their operating budget, and then Finance Commission can meet that dollar amount. So presumably, yes, but Treasurer Wong, if you had any other information you'd like to add also. At this point, you should probably just sit next to Gabe for a minute.
Hi, y'all. So when we put out the applications, student organizations consider themselves either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then they know about the funding maximums, and so they'll put in that maximum. Whenever there was an exception that was asked, they had to email me to make sure that that would be in compliance, and then I would either grant it or deny it. And so with the exceptions to tier 3 maximum, how it was applied this year was that anybody who made an exception. If I allowed them through, they would be able to present on that line item just within the request in itself. But there were plenty of organizations that had to change their budget because they had information that they had now versus when they had before. And so there's nothing in the bylaws or nothing that I say that bars them from saying, no, you can't actually put this or this in your presentation. The only thing that we have rules for is you have to have a budget breakdown, these things for why you're asking for funding, things like that. And it's something that we request as Finance Commission, just so that the presentation has a baseline for organizations to work off of so that they can be a little bit faster. And so Finance Commission doesn't have to ask the same questions over and over again, to allow Finance Commissioners to ask different questions for different orgs, because the context of each and every single organization is very different. And so just to have that baseline requirement to allow Finance Commission to ask questions pertinent to the context of that specific organization.
Did that answer your question, Senator Hatch? And I can also clarify a little. Treasurer Wong makes a great point there. There's nothing barring organizations from putting all of their operational costs and having it be totality $100,000 or XYZ. But having that cap of $20,000 of that request amount to saying, this is our operational costs, this is what we're allowed to request, and then Finance Commission can meet that request, meet somewhere in the middle, choose to give them $20,000. But ultimately, you're correct, they can put higher dollar amounts in those presentations, as Treasurer Wong had stated. There's nothing in the bylaws barring that. Senator Barnes, and then we'll go to Senator Stinnett.
I've got another point of information. Do we know what the upcoming budget is for appropriations?
Unfortunately, until the new student body president is sworn in, we don't 100% know yet. There is I think there's a proposal in this bill that establishes a maximum, but regardless if that language exists or not, until a new president is sworn in and develops their budget, we don't 100% know. There is a minimum established by the policy, but not an overall budget.
And to that point, that's also within the legislation if you were looking, establishing that maximum too. Senator Stinnett.
I also have a point of information for the treasurer. So we're saying that the request cannot exceed 20,000, and I am sorry if you've already stated this. It's been a long day. If they were to put in like their budget presentation and everything above 20,000, would you be able to fund them above that? Like, not a question of if you would, but could you possibly fund them over that, or is that maximum still like strictly at 20?
Finance Commission would have the ability to fund them over the $20,000 amount.
Thank you, Treasurer Wong. We'll go to Chairperson Bobbitt and then Senator Mallard.
So what the treasurer doesn't tell you is that Finance Commission won't fund them over 20,000. As a matter of practice this year, the members of Finance Commission repeatedly denied requests that were above what they put on their application. So if an individual came in and requested $5,000, but they presented a budget for $8,000, the Finance Commission would deny everything above the $5,000 request as a matter of practice. Then to say that, okay, we're just going to limit them to $20,000, and then if the Finance Commission would like to provide funding above $20,000, they can. I think this is a false reality. If you set the maximum at $20,000, that's going to be the maximum. It is unrealistic to expect that Finance Commissioners would grant a request or grant a dollar amount that is greater than the request. I don't disagree in principle that the odds of someone getting funded at $20,000 are not great, but at the same time, we routinely have organizations that have an operating expenditure that far exceeds that $20,000 cap. So I see no harm in allowing an organization to allow or ask for a lot of money and express financial need. We all know that, or we are never going to be able to fund everybody fully at request. But it's important for our finance commissioners to be able to have a complete picture as they prep for these hearings and an understanding of what the financial needs of all of our organizations are.
Senator, are you subverting? Okay, Vice President Fawn.
Yeah, so I don't appreciate the implication that the supervisor treasurer hasn't been forthcoming and telling this information that she won't give this information out, that we haven't requested approved more than 20 requests more, that are way more than $20,000 or are a high amount this year. I think the reality is, as other senators have stated, we can't fund obviously every club at their full amount. I think that $20,000 cap is a realistic amount, considering each year with a growing number amount of student organizations here on campus. I don't see us going any further than the amount that was already stated in there. I hesitate to talk about like future sessions and future finance commissions, because we won't know what their sentiment will be moving forward. But I think we're at the point where we're just talking about similar topics for this bill. I think we should just move on and vote on this amendment.
I'd like to speak to something before I get to Senator Mallard and then Senator Stinnett. I think this amount is very personal for people. It ensures some of our RSOs are truly funded to their needs. But also, in addendum to that, we have budget cuts to prepare for and look at. So it's a complicated and multifaceted issue. And to be clear, when it comes to future sessions, I also hesitate to speak for future sessions, and I think it's not a problem to discuss, what has occurred this session, as long as we're subverting any of that authority back to our treasurer. Ultimately, for me, I'm lying more in the middle on this issue, truly, same as before. I think I understand the point of the $20,000, I do, in addressing those budget cuts and discussing that, but I also agree and understand Senator Enzi's point of, I would hate to limit future sessions based on the reality of this session. Now, it's a tough situation, and ultimately, at the end of the day, if this is struck, I trust the treasurer to take into account the needs of our student body and also needs to adhere to a budget. So ultimately, I have faith in our future finance commission. I also hesitate to say that that request wouldn't exceed that amount, because that's a hypothetical that we don't know, and we're speaking about people who we don't know, and I just don't like to live in that reality. So let's reel it back in here. And like Vice President Fawn stated, I completely agree. Let's get our last few members here. I think we have gotten the general consensus of the body, and I think we can move forward to a vote. Senator Stinnett. Oh, I had Senator Mallard first. I'm so sorry, but you're okay. Senator Stinnett.
Yeah, I completely understand the middle ground point on this, but I do believe that we have to have faith in our future treasurer and our future finance commission. The budget is tight, and we don't know what that commission is going to be wanting to put any exceptions at. These Tier 3 organizations are going to be requesting an exception for a reason, and I feel like it is harsh to, everyone's going to be facing some harsh realities just because we're in such a deficit right now, but having even more restriction on some of these large organizations, I feel like is just unnecessary, because you can cap them whenever we get into appropriations, but I don't think we need to preemptively cap them, because that could just really negatively affect them.
We'll go to Senator Mallard, and then we'll move to a vote.
I'm going to be speaking in negation, as I've already stated. We have a cap, and then you're asking for an exception, and so now we have an exception to the cap if you're allowing for people to just ask basically an unlimited amount, and puts all those lower, smaller organizations at a deficit, which we have sort of seen, not major, but I was part of finance I was part of the appropriations process like my first year, and it's definitely something. It's different for every single appropriations group, and saying that they don't fund based off of certain reasons or whatever. It's not applicable because we don't know who is part of the commission. Also, I just want to emphasize this again: be extremely careful with how you're voting in terms of this, because it has already been stated. About people who are presidents, and certain stuff has been said that can be questionable. So if you are voting based off of the fact that you're part of an organization, I would highly, highly advise that you abstain, because that could be a violation of bias policy.
Unfortunately, I'm so sorry, Senator Hatch. I will be moving directly into a vote on this item. I think we have had sufficient thoughts on the table, and I'd like to see the body's consensus.
Voting is open. With 8 in favor, 4 against, and 9 abstentions, the motion fails.
Okay, I'm gonna have some last minute thoughts. I'm gonna get anyone else who hasn't spoken, and then we'll get directly to Chairperson Bobbitt. Chairperson Bobbitt.
So while we're on the topic of appropriations, I think there's something that everybody needs to be cognizant of and aware of. We are making a substantial change to how we contextualize appropriations. It was talked about earlier that the language as it has existed sets a minimum for appropriations. The proposed change in this eliminates that and instead sets a maximum in appropriations. Under this policy, hypothetically in the future, an SGA president could decide to fund appropriations at $0. I'm not saying that scenario would be likely. I'm just saying as the proposed language sits, there is no longer a guarantee of funding.
We'll get to Senator Hatch and then Vice President Fawn.
So the maximum funding, I do think, is something that somewhat pertains to the previous discussion, because it now is almost impossible to have a surplus in funding because there is a maximum. So just kind of want to throw that one out there.
Vice President Fawn.
Yeah, and to address the concern that in the case that a SUPI president decides to allocate $0 in a budget for appropriations or any other funds, the Legislative Council over the summer, which is basically our de facto Senate pretty much over the summer, they can reject the president's budget or even and say do it again, or they can probably amend some line items also. That brings me to my other concern with individual funding budget and changes that were made in Legislative Council, where it set a minimum for the amount allocated for individual funding to $10,000. I would feel more comfortable making it allocate equally to the fall spring semester according to the president's budget, just to allow the SUPI president in future sessions the flexibility to adjust to any budget cuts, since we did make some of this session. And with that, I'm making an amendment to amend Chapter 1, Section 2, subsection 4, to revert back to the language it was before Legislative Council, which reads, the individual funding budget will be allocated equally into the fall and spring semesters according to the president's budget. All unallocated unexpected funds from the fall semester may be reallocated in the spring semester.
Are you seconding? Okay, seconded by Senator Mallard. If we'll give one more second, multiple seconds, could you repeat that motion? Thank you.
Yes, so the motion is to revert the language back to read the
You should do this section and area.
Yes, in Chapter 1, Section 2, subsection 4, I'm amending it to read the individual funding budget will be allocated equally into the fall and spring semesters according to the president's budget. All unallocated and unexpected funds from the fall semester may be reallocated in the spring semester.
And I know we have a second. We'll get into debate in a second. I just want you to all have that up there so you can wrap your brains around it. I hope we sufficiently wrapped our heads around it. Senator Mallard.
Yeah, the reason why I second it is because I do agree that if there's a difference in money, it still states that it is equal. It would still be split in half between each semester. I believe the reason why we had this was because we had an amount, and then we split that in half, and then we put that into the into here. But now this states that if we have 50,000, let's just say we can now do 25, 25. Or if we had less, if we only had 10,000, it'd be 5, 5. So I do think that this would be helpful.
Any against this motion? Chairperson Bobbitt.
So a similar suggestion was made in legislative affairs, and it was ultimately rejected because there was a sentiment from myself, and I'm not going to speak for everyone else, that we would be doing a disservice to the student body by allowing this flexibility in this specific line item. Individual funding is never something that we have a surplus of. To the best of my knowledge, we consistently run out every year. So by allowing the flexibility in the budget, we are saying that yes, the president can add money, but at the same time, the president can also drastically reduce the amount of money. The reason that this line specifically allocates $15,000 to each semester was to guarantee that this would be funded and to make sure that we were providing resources to our students. Not all departments, not all students have the resources to achieve and to go to different professional events and conferences. So this funding was created to allow them an opportunity to get to these places so that they otherwise would not be able to go. I think we'd be doing an extreme disservice to the student body if we allow the flexibility on this for it to potentially not be funded in the future. With the language of equally into the fall and spring semester, it can be equally $0. And once again, I'm not saying an administration would do that. I'm just saying that these safeguards were put in place to specifically protect the availability of our students to do these things. And I am fundamentally opposed to loosening restrictions and providing any wiggle room on whether or not we provide these opportunities in the future.
I feel the exact same way. I think it's tough when it comes to this type of funding because really this type of funding is one of the first places you'd really look in cutting a little bit from that, because that's $30,000 a year. And I think it was discussions that said, oh, we want to remove that to take into account the shortfall for next session, and I completely understand that, which is why that $10,000 minimum amount was decided, because it would give the leeway of $20,000 to address that budget shortfall. I was personally comfortable with that in legislative affairs. I remain comfortable with that number, and I would not want it to go less than that, simply because there could be a reality where we absolutely have to take from this fund because there's nowhere else to take from. I think it's necessary, and it does raise potential issues of where do we find this, where do we take from, and where do we allocate. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I would feel most comfortable going into this next session with these budget cuts that I know that this will be funded at least at the $10,000 minimum. That's personally how I feel. This program should exist. It should be funded, and I'm comfortable with leaving it at this amount, so I will vote against this, but ultimately, it's the will of the body, and I appreciate Vice President Phan's sentiments at that too. It's a tough situation, so I'd like to get other thoughts. Senator Hatch.
Yeah, completely removing a minimum would kill this bill entirely for me. I would vote against not like the entire bill if we remove the minimum. I was at Legislative Affairs. If I remember correctly, the vote was either 501 or 600 in favor of keeping a minimum on there. Anybody can correct me on that. I think it's really important to fund this budget. I think that it's money that goes directly back to the students for very important things in their lives. And again, it's just an easy place to cut, and I think that funding it at a minimum of $10,000, we're already cutting it by a third, or giving the ability for it to be cut by a third. I think that's more than enough.
Thank you. Senator Mallard?
I'm sorry, Matthew, but Actually, I'm going to switch sides. I was making a negation of what I seconded. I do actually. I understand more of why there is a minimum, and I do think that that'd be better, since that also means that it could be more than, I guess, 20,000, right? Because that's saying 10 per semester, or is it just 10,000 5 person? Okay.
I'd love to give anyone else the chance to speak in favor of this amendment. Vice President Vaughn?
Yeah, so when I propose this amendment, I am by no means saying that individual funding is not important, and I think it's an incredibly important initiative. I think we should give the opportunity, make it so that it's more flexible for future administrations, for not only this, but other funds. My argument would be the safeguard against giving less money to individual funding would be the Senate. Ultimately, the Senate does have to approve the final budget for the supervised president's budget. And it's the president and treasurer's job to find, if there are any places to cut, that is their job to find where that would be at. I think we're creating all these doomsday scenarios where the supervised president would give $0 or give absolutely nothing, when the Senate can simply say no and even amend that amount in the end.
I'm going to ultimately end this debate period, as I think we have sufficient debate on both sides. Additionally, we have one more item that I have to get to before we end, so we'll go directly into vote on this amendment.
Voting is open. With 1 in favor, 11 against, and 9 abstentions, the motion fails.
Okay, last minute thoughts before we move on and pass this legislation so we can get to a very important bill. Chairperson Bobbitt.
I would strongly urge against trying to wrap this up. There are still fundamental problems with our funding mechanisms that we need to discuss. One of the issues is the newfound prohibition against funding organizations funding engaging in political purposes. There is currently a organization who engaged in that type of event who was referred to the court so that we could clarify what SGA's position is on that. If we make this change without addressing that issue, their funding request will automatically be denied, because once this is signed, it is letter of the law. Additionally, there are other considerations across this entire budget that we need to address. We consistently run into the issue, watching the Finance Commission, commissioners, the treasurer, everyone in the room from the central office on down, there are parts of this funding that nobody knows how to address and interpret. One of the issues we run into is the prohibition on travel, of not authorizing more than one method of travel. Some have interpreted that to mean that we will either pay for your gas or the rental car, but not both. I understand we have things to talk about tonight. I understand we have a time limit. This is not the bill to rush.
So I'm going to take a second to subvert to Advisor Fonseca, just so he can explain any potential updates we might have on that process to the body, so they can understand what Chairperson Bobbitt is speaking to.
Are you specifically talking about the court case that was filed?
Yes, that's correct.
For reference to the whole body, I can't remember which commission meeting it was, but there was a commission meeting a couple weeks ago that an organization, through organization funding, applied for funding. That the commission felt and or had thoughts that were connected to partisan issues. The recommendation was made, recommendation was brought back, and then a request was filed to interpret. The court has made an opinion on that, and the basis of the opinion, originally the basis of the opinion is you can't use, well, let me take a step back. The Finance Commission utilized language out of appropriations to originally, and if I get any of this incorrect, please, if the treasurer may have to correct me on this, but Finance Commission originally used appropriations language to deny the funding for this organization. After that denial was made by the commission, in conversations that the treasurer and I had, went back and determined we utilize language of a chapter that has no weight over another chapter. That case was submitted to the court. The court did rule that you cannot use appropriations language to determine funding for organizations. And so because there's no language right now in organization funding that prohibits partisan things, that can't be the basis of a denial. So they did meet on Monday and rendered that opinion earlier this afternoon.
I have a follow-up question there that I'd like to ask you. So in Section 4, prohibited expenditures of the organizational funding, it was added a 7 and an 8 that talks about that partisan purposes and those kinds of things that was added after the fact. Considering the fact that this funding request has not been given to the Senate yet for approval, what would that look like if we approved it tonight and then brought that legislation or brought that funding bill to the Senate? Would it then mean that they have to fall within those the bylaws pursuant of the 7 and 8, or would it be? I just want to know the process there, because I don't know when that will be given back to the Senate or those kinds of things.
I would probably, if this language were to pass tonight, it still has to be signed. And so there's still the approval process of being submitted to the executive branch for signature. If the other funding bill is submitted next week and this bill is signed, one could make the argument, and this is me just speaking on me saying this myself, if I were the organization, I would challenge that decision in court as a ex post facto argument of establishing policy because after the fact of a recommendation. I think the original request of the funding bill was stipulated that it'd be introduced following a decision from the court, but ultimately I think it'd be up to the organization to make a decision if they want to challenge it, or up to this body, because yes, you haven't received that funding bill. It also could not have been submitted until the opinion was rendered, which was, I think, the ultimate request of the commission before the bill was submitted.
Furthermore, this legislation would very clearly remove the Senate review, and potentially passing of a signature would mean that that funding mechanism would no longer be going through the Senate. So I guess there's disparities there, and I'm glad Chairperson Bobbitt brought this up. That is a little bit more confusing, so it would just be kind of a race to the finish line, I guess, for this organization, which is horrible to me, and makes me sad, but I'm just confused. I would like to get more clarity there.
I mean, the other caveat is additional language could be added to this bill that it says it waits to take effect into the next session, so that nothing this session can prevent a particular funding bill from being processed. I know there's currently not language in here that stipulates that the bill, as is, the bill would take effect immediately if it's signed, but additional language could also be added into this bill to say that these changes don't take into effect until the start of the next session, which then nothing in this would then preclude or prohibit the ability for that organization to continue its funding process.
Sorry, folks, I know this is a lot of jargon and conversations, but Senator Barnes, if you had a question or thoughts.
Point of information, we've got a lot of conversation going on here. We have a couple more line items to get to. Is there a way to move this and table it till next week's committee of the whole?
So we will not be having committee of the whole next week, so it would go back to Senate. We can absolutely do that. And in fact, I'm going to motion to do that. Thank you, Gavin. Sorry, Senator Barnes. I'm going to make the motion to table this legislation until next week for consideration. Make sure you have all your ideas and thoughts, and that'll give us a little bit more information on some of these processes. Do I have a second? Seeing multiple seconds. I'm not going to accept any debate on this item, and we'll move directly into voting on tabling.
Voting is open. With 18 in favor, 0 against, and 3 abstentions, the motion passes.
I'm moving directly to move 7.1 up the agenda so that we can get our lovely Leslie up here, as we need a Chief Justice. So we'll move to 7.1, and the author is here. I'd like to speak.
Hi, everybody. How are we doing tonight? Yay! I feel it. Yeah. I appreciate you all sticking this one out. I'm going to make this really quick, but I just have to say I love Leslie Hernandez. That's my queen back there. I am so honored to stand here today and ask for the Senate's confirmation of Leslie into the position of Chief Justice for a second term, mind you. For the 68th session of Student Government Association. I've known Leslie, gosh damn, I'm like eating this microphone right now, I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm just excited to get out of here. Anyways, I've known Leslie, I keep doing this, I'm so sorry. I've known Leslie for several years now, and I can gladly say that there is no one more qualified to serve in this role than her. Leslie is a junior, majoring in political science. She's also involved in Ambassadors for Diversity and Inclusion, Student Ambassador Society, Pre-Law Student Association, and she also works in the HSI office. In all of my time serving the students, in all my time working with Leslie, she's been incredibly diligent, dedicated, and passionate about serving the students of Wichita State University. She is the perfect candidate to serve in this role for a second term, and I am so proud of her and all that she has accomplished in this role so far. I have full confidence that she will continue to do amazing things as the Chief Justice, and I yield the rest of my time to the nominee.
Leslie, I know this is important, but we are on a deadline. Speak to your heart's content, but give us like a minute or two of leeway.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This helps that Kylie already took care of my introduction. So a year ago, I stood before the 66th session to be confirmed for the position of Chief Justice, and I vividly remember the one question I was asked was from Senator Jay Thompson, who asked me how I was going to fill Maureen Wetta's shoes, considering the 14 cases that she oversaw and the effort she made. From the second he asked the question, I knew I would never try or be able to fill her shoes. My goal then and my goal now is to bring my own passion and work ethic to the role, and I would never try to be someone else. Although I can get into some of the work and efforts I've made as Chief Justice for the 67th session, I will save that for when there are closing remarks in a few weeks. For now, I think it's important to discuss my growth as a student leader and just human being during this session. I did not expect to grow so much in such little time. Mentally, I had a pretty rough fall semester. I was physically exhausted, unmotivated, and honestly in a rut. I did a lot of reflecting, and I was able to learn how to be driven while being aware of my own mental health and overall boundaries. This semester has been a breath of fresh air, and I'm happy to say that I stand before you as a proud product of that struggle and time of reflection. Despite the growth and changes I've made to be a better leader on campus and in my spaces, I am still motivated by the same life experiences. I am still the eldest daughter of 2 immigrant parents. I'm still a product of my parents' push for education and long life learning. The moments I spent translating for my mom still play in my head, and I'm always conscious of my influence on my younger sister. Helping my parents has made me realize the barriers between Spanish-speaking families and a full understanding of the law. On a larger scope, there are plenty of barriers between constituents and the law. On a more relevant scope, there can be barriers between students and their full understanding of the governing documents that affect the student organizations they join, the regulations within the association, and their overall student experience. One of my soapboxes is the power of language. Because I was always so worried about how my family would be affected by what was said or written in the documents I translated, I grew to become fascinated by human communication and the power of words themselves. Punctuation and sentence structure can impact the meaning of a statement just as much as a word can, or likewise, the lack thereof. Often I hear individuals within our society make comments like, they didn't actually mean that, or you're exaggerating, it was just a statement. To deny that there is power in words is to be ignorant of the times when words have been used to console distraught individuals, to oppress people, to create change, etc. Or how we learned in elementary school, there's a huge difference between I want to eat grandma and I want to eat, grandma. The words in the association's governing document affect our students, and I'm passionate about protecting students' rights and preserving the association's governing documents. Serving as Chief Justice for a second term would allow me to continue giving back to the student body while pursuing my passions. To me, being an ethical representative of the student body is invaluable. I have been able to hone my skills, train new justices, and represent the court in the conversations I have. I ask that you place your trust in me again for the role of Chief Justice. I hope to raise awareness about our new Maxient Forum, providing easier access to the court to our students. I want to continue emphasizing our presence on campus. The cases we receive are a reflection of the issues on campus. Each branch tackles the issues differently, but they all contribute to the purpose of SGA. Our student body's involvement also reflects future patterns in civic engagement. We may not be able to make someone care about what we do, but we can do everything in our power to make it easier for them to care. I will strive to continue empowering students to use their voices if given this opportunity. I thank you again for listening to me tonight. I commend you for the long nights that you've had, and especially tonight. I hope you can place your trust in me and my ability to hold the position of Chief Justice for the 68th session. And I will stand for questions if there's even time, but.
Thank you, Leslie. Are there any questions? Chairperson Bobbitt?
I have a point of information to Dr. Fonseca. What item on our legislation warranted this meeting being live streamed?
It's not live streamed. The captioner is, live streamed in a general sense for our YouTube. It's the captioner that cannot go past time.
I understand that, but why are we doing it that way?
I think we just scheduled it for the last couple of meetings that way. I think after we started student fees, we just began this regular process again. But we can definitely look at that differently for the next time.
Well, I guess my question to that point is similar to how we did a couple meetings ago. Could we pause, open up a secondary meeting, and then just continue on to accomplish the legislative goals?
Yes, I think that's up to the body to decide. But I guess this, what we did last time, we could potentially do again. That's up to the body to decide.
I know it's formal, but give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, raise it a little bit higher. I can't see your thumbs up or thumbs down. Help me count.
I'll count from the side.
General consensus is 10 thumbs up, 8 thumbs down. And then a couple people who didn't make the effort to vote, which I assume is abstaining. Let's ask questions to our wonderful candidate while our advisor sorts out that situation. Do we have any other questions for Leslie? Okay. Seeing none, I'd like to move into the debating period on this item. I'd like to first speak really quickly. Leslie, what a fantastic person. I know you're walking back, but to me also, beginning this session with 2 other incredibly strong female leaders, I don't know why I almost got choked up just then, was such an honor, and I just can't express enough how much she deserves this. I won't cry. Save that for the banquet. So I'd like to give anyone else a chance really quickly to give. Advisor Fonseca, did you have something?
Not related to the current appointment, but to the question of the live stream.
Yes, please share.
So I want to be clear about 2 things. One, we need to be respectful of the people who also have to stay here late night, the building managers, the staff. The building closes at 11. This is not a student fee night. This is not a student fee bill. Last time we were able to do so under the thought that we were adopting a student fees package. I'm just going to say the building closes at 11, and I don't want to keep putting the RSC building staff in a position to have to keep just because we
I'm so sorry, Gabe.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
going to interrupt
Yeah.
you and unilaterally decide that we are not going to open up another live stream. We have enough time next week, and we'll be starting at 6:30. To remain respectful and courteous, I'm going to ask that we continue this, vote, table the other things incredibly quickly, and move on. You cannot do unanimous consent. If that's what you were asking. Senator Enzi. Okay. Yeah, I know. So I'm going to move to the voting period on this item. I'm so sorry, Leslie, that we were rushing. We love you.
It's open.
This requires a 2/3 majority to pass.
With 21 in favor, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, I love this thought. Senator Enzi.
I move that we postpone all pending business and new business that we have not considered yet this evening until next week.
I second that. I'm going to move directly into a vote on that item.
Guys, seriously, it's important you don't vote before I say to vote, because if you do, it completely messes up the vote count. So yeah, voting's now open. In favor, the motion passes unanimously.
I'm adjourning this meeting at 10 p.m. Please give a round of applause to Leslie here.
I think you just emailed. Do you have a specific one? I can just go ahead.